He only wanted to refill a glass of water. But in the blink of an eye, that simple act turned into public humiliation. In a restaurant built on prestige and power, a black waitress was treated like dirt by a man who thought his wealth made him untouchable. He mocked her, belittled her, and then made a cruel offer, one he believed she'd never dare to accept. Yet beneath the quiet of her pain burned a brilliance the world had forgotten. Because what he didn't know was that the woman he shamed was about to shatter everything he believed about genius, race, and worth. But what happened next would leave even the world's richest man speechless. Kesha Williams had spent the last 3 years hiding her brilliance behind a waitress apron. Every night at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, she served the wealthy and powerful, people who'd never guessed a woman pouring their champagne once studied at MIT. Her life had become a careful rhythm of quiet service, fake smiles, and counting tips that never seemed enough to cover her grandmother's medical bills. Each shift, she told herself it was temporary, that one day she'd find a way back to the world of numbers and proofs where she truly belonged. But life had a way of reminding her where society thought she should stay, especially when men like Richard Hartwell, the arrogant billionaire whose face graced magazine covers, walked in expecting the world to bow. That night, as Kesha refilled his glass, she didn't know she was about to be dragged into a public spectacle, one that would test not just her dignity, but her entire sense of worth, because the man she was serving didn't just see a waitress. He saw an opportunity to remind her of her place. But what he didn't realize was that this quiet woman had the power to change everything, starting with him. The dining room shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where power dressed itself in gold and arrogance wore designer suits. Kesha moved between tables with quiet precision, balancing trays heavier than her paychecks. Her shift had been smooth until Richard Hartwell arrived. He was everything the tabloids claimed, brilliant, rich, and merciless. The kind of man who made servers tremble with a single raised eyebrow. When Kesha reached his table to refill his water, he didn't thank her. He didn't even look at her. Instead, he recoiled, like her touch carried contamination. "Get your hands off my table." The words cut through the restaurant like glass. Conversations faltered. Silverware stilled. Kesha froze, the pitcher trembling in her grip. Hartwell shoved it away, spilling water across the expensive linen, and a cluster of napkins covered in equations. He stood, towering above her. "Do you have any idea what you've done? These are proofs worth more than your life." His laughter carried across the marble floor, cruel and theatrical. Patrons turned to watch the spectacle. The billionaire and the black waitress he decided to humiliate. "Tell you what," he sneered, waving one soggy napkin in her face. "Solve this, and I'll give you everything I own." He chuckled, loud enough for the crowd to hear, enjoying their amusement. "But of course, that's not what your people are known for, is it?" Laughter followed him as he swept his arm across the table, sending glass and silver crashing to the floor. The sound echoed like gunfire. Kesha knelt silently, collecting shards that sliced her fingers, while Hartwell strode out without another glance. What no one noticed was that as she cleaned, her eyes moved across those equations. Despite the humiliation, her mind, sharp, disciplined, unbroken, began tracing the numbers. And there, hidden in Hartwell's genius, she saw it, a mistake. Subtle but fatal. A flaw no one else had caught. Hours later, as she scrubbed the last stain from the floor, the memory of that equation refused to leave her. Hartwell's arrogance had blinded him to an error that any good mathematician would have caught. But Kesha wasn't supposed to see it. She was supposed to stay invisible. Her manager barked orders from the kitchen. "Table 12 needs their check, now." She nodded, keeping her head down. He liked reminding her of her place, too. A waitress, nothing more. But as she cleared the last table, she overheard the guests talking about Hartwell's upcoming event, the $1 Million Math Challenge, an annual competition where the world's brightest minds battle for prestige and fortune. Tonight's challenge, they said, was impossible, a problem known as the convergence paradox. The same equation she'd just seen drenched in water. Kesha's breath caught. Convergence theory wasn't new to her. She'd studied it at MIT, before life had forced her out. Her father's accident, her brother's therapy, the bills that no formula could balance. She'd traded the classroom for a paycheck and theorems for survival. But standing there, listening to the guests gossip about Hartwell's brilliance, something inside her reignited, a spark she thought life had crushed. Maybe she couldn't buy her way into those halls anymore, but she could still think. She could still solve. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. The $1 Million Math Challenge begins in 1 hour. Lincoln Center was just 12 blocks away. She looked down at her stained apron, her trembling hands. She had 40 minutes left on her shift. Logic warred with courage. She needed this job. Rent was due. Her grandmother's prescriptions were waiting. But when she thought about the way Hartwell had looked at her, like she was nothing, something in her snapped. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and walked out. The cold Manhattan air hit her like a dare. Each step toward Lincoln Center felt impossible, but she kept walking. The glow of the city lights seemed to whisper one truth she'd almost forgotten. Brilliance has no uniform. Inside Lincoln Center, crowds filled the lobby, watching giant screens broadcasting the event. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. And on the main stage stood Richard Hartwell, soaking in the applause. He raised a sheet of paper. The same equation she had memorized from those wet napkins. "Tonight," he declared, "I present to you the convergence paradox. 3 years of research, verified by the best mathematicians in the world. If anyone can find a single error in this proof, I'll give them everything I own." The audience gasped. Social media exploded. $100 billion on the line. And in the crowd, a waitress stood very still, a folded napkin burning in her pocket. She already knew where his mistake was. She just didn't know if the world was ready to hear it from someone like her. The applause thundered as Hartwell signed his guarantee for all to see. He believed he was untouchable, but he didn't know the woman he'd shamed was standing just a few feet away, holding the key to his downfall. If Kesha stepped forward now, she could expose him in front of millions. But if she failed, she'd be laughed out of the room, branded a fool, and lose everything she'd worked to protect. The line between humiliation and history had never been thinner. And as the lights dimmed and Hartwell prepared to unveil his so-called masterpiece, Kesha took one quiet breath, because she knew what she was about to do would change everything. But what happened when she finally stepped into the spotlight would shake the world far beyond mathematics. The auditorium lights dimmed as the spotlight fixed on Richard Hartwell. Cameras clicked in a frenzy, journalists whispered predictions, and the audience leaned in, hungry for genius. He smiled, calm, confident, cruel. The air around him carried the weight of money, privilege, and power. Kesha stood at the back, trembling, not from fear, but from a fire that had been building since that night in the restaurant. She watched him gesture to the whiteboard, his hand moving across lines of numbers that danced like symbols of supremacy. Every mark was precise, rehearsed, flawless, or so he thought. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is mathematics in its purest form. Elegant, absolute, indisputable." The audience erupted in applause. But to Kesha, those numbers screamed their lie. She had memorized the exact point of failure, the place where his arrogance had blinded him. Her heart pounded as the host announced, "If anyone believed they found an error in Mr. Hartwell's proof, step forward now." Silence, then murmurs, then laughter. No one moved. Hartwell smirked, exactly as expected. Kesha's palms were slick with sweat. She could walk away. Let him keep his empire, his reputation, his comfortable delusion. But she remembered the sting of humiliation, the way he'd looked at her, as if her existence was an offense. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "If they close the door on you, child, kick it open." And so she did. Her heels clicked against the marble as she stepped forward. Every eye turned toward her, confusion first, then disbelief. "Excuse me," she said softly, voice trembling but clear. "There is a mistake." The laughter came instantly. Reporters craned their necks. Cameras zoomed in. A woman in a server's uniform, standing before the most powerful mathematician in the world. Hartwell blinked, the smirk returning. "And who might you be?" She swallowed hard. "Kesha." "I work at the Manhattan Grand." The audience rippled with amusement. Someone muttered, "She must be lost." But Kesha continued. She pointed to the third equation on the board. Your convergent assumption fails after the fifth iteration. The sequence doesn't collapse, it diverges. The room fell silent. Hartwell frowned, turning to the board, scanning his own equations. His hand hesitated. That's impossible, he muttered. Kesha stepped closer. You divide it by a term, it becomes undefined as n approaches infinity. It invalidates the entire proof. A murmur swept through the hall. Mathematicians whispered urgently, pulling out notebooks, verifying the numbers. One by one, the murmurs turned into gasps, then silence. Hartwell's face drained of color. His hand trembled as he looked back at her, eyes burning with disbelief and fury. You stole this, he hissed. You're nothing. You think you can embarrass me here. But the truth was already unraveling on every screen. A professor stood up. She's right, he said quietly. It fails at the limit. Then another voice. The proof collapses. Her correction holds. In seconds, the narrative flipped. The cameras turned, not to Hartwell, but to her. Kesha stood frozen, caught between vindication and disbelief. Hartwell staggered backward, muttering denials, but no one was listening anymore. The microphones, the lights, the world, they all belonged to her now. And then, in an act of pure spite, Hartwell lunged for the microphone. This is fraud, he shouted. Do you know who I am? Kesha's voice cut through the chaos, calm and unshaken. Yes, she said. And now, so does everyone else. The crowd erupted, not with laughter, but applause. For the first time, it was his turn to stand in silence, humiliated beneath the same lights that had always favored him. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there, steady and unbroken, as the same media that once ignored her now scrambled to capture her face. But beneath the triumph, something deeper stirred. This wasn't just about an equation. It was about every door that had ever been slammed, every brilliance dismissed because of uniform, a skin tone, or a name that didn't sound like theirs. As Hartwell was escorted offstage, his empire crumbling in real time, Kesha turned toward the cameras. For the first time, the world saw her, not as a waitress, not as a mistake, but as a mind they could no longer ignore. She had come for justice. Instead, she found history. But as the flashes blinded her and the questions poured in, one thought echoed louder than the applause. Would they celebrate her now, or find new ways to silence her tomorrow? The real test of equality was only just beginning. The night after the confrontation, Kesha sat alone on her apartment balcony, the city lights flickering beneath her like fragments of something both beautiful and broken. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Interview requests, congratulations, sponsorships, think pieces dissecting her moment of brilliance. Everyone suddenly wanted a piece of her story. But behind the applause, she could still feel the sting of that first humiliation. The night she was told she didn't belong. The media called her the waitress who outsmarted a billionaire. They celebrated her as a symbol of perseverance, of talent finally recognized. But Kesha knew the truth. Recognition didn't erase the wound. It only drew attention to how deep it ran. Because for every Kesha who broke through, there were countless others still scrubbing tables, still silenced, still unseen. Days later, she walked past a Manhattan Grand, the same restaurant where everything had begun. The maitre d', the same man who once ignored her, smiled nervously, pretending not to notice. Inside, another young black woman hurried between tables, eyes down, shoulders tight, the same way Kesha once did. Kesha paused at a window, realizing that her victory hadn't changed the world. It had only cracked the surface. But cracks are where the light gets in. A few weeks later, a headline made waves. Hartwell steps down amid scandal. His empire was crumbling, lawsuits, investigations, partnerships dissolving overnight. The man who once believed he was untouchable had been undone by the woman he tried to humiliate. Yet Kesha didn't celebrate his downfall. What satisfied her was revenge. It was visibility. The truth had been seen and for once believed. She used her newfound platform carefully. When universities called, offering honorary degrees and public appearances, she accepted, but not for herself. Each speech she gave, she mentioned others, the janitor with a physics dream, the bus driver who once studied computer science. The young girl told her accent was too unprofessional. "The problem," she said during one televised interview, "isn't that we don't exist. It's that you've never looked at us long enough to see." Her words echoed across classrooms, online feeds, and corporate meetings where diversity was still treated like decoration. And slowly, something shifted. Schools reached out a fund program for underrepresented students. A foundation was named after her, a scholarship for those forced to abandon education because life demanded survival first. Kesha didn't ask for fame, and she didn't chase forgiveness. She only wanted the world to remember that brilliance has no uniform, and dignity needs no permission. Months later, she returned to Lincoln Center, not for competition, but for recognition. They unveiled a plaque in her honor, right beside the hall where she had once stood trembling before the crowd. It read, "Kesha Daniels, proof that genius can't be defined by color or class." She ran her fingers across the engraved letters, tears threatening but never falling. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just her story. It was a mirror held up to a world still struggling to see people for who they are, rather than what they look like. And yet, even as she stood there, surrounded by cameras and flashing lights, she couldn't help but wonder, how many others would have to endure what she did before justice stopped needing spectacle to exist? Her voiceover, soft but resolute, might have closed a film like this. "They'll remember the night I solved an equation. But what I remember is the years I spent invisible. The silence, the stares, the small humiliations no one wrote about. This isn't just my story. It's the story of every person told they don't belong in rooms they helped build." So, the next time you see someone overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, ask yourself, what brilliance might you be walking past? And when will we finally start seeing them before it's too late? The screen fades to black, just her name remaining, glowing quietly against the darkness. Because in a world that tried to erase her, Kesha didn't just rewrite an equation. She rewrote the narrative.